So welcome to our first video that really gets probably at the heart of what this unit is about. We're just going to work on simplifying different expressions. And we're going to be using the basic rules that we see on the first page of our note sheet for the unit. I'm just going to give you a few basic strategies for this. There's not necessarily a right answer, but a lot of times we should all get to the same answer if we use some of the same strategies. So if we look at the first example, and they just say simplify, they don't tell us what we want to make it equal. I'm going to look at the first example right up here and say, well, sine of x is already pretty simple. I don't think I need to change that at all. But maybe cosecant of negative x, I could look at my list of rules and try to figure something out. So I would write this as sine of x staying the same. And if I look at my list of rules, I see that cosecant of negative x is the same thing as negative cosecant of positive x. So it can be a little maybe confusing to write that. I'm going to use a square bracket and then say, oops, sorry, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. It's going to be negative cosecant of x. Finish off that square bracket. Okay, so that's what I kind of have as a basic substitution for this right now. And if I look at this and I look at my basic list of rules, I know that cosecant is the same thing as 1 over sine. So what this really is equivalent to is sine of x times, and again it's negative, but that cosecant of x really becomes 1 over sine of x. Okay, so now just think in terms of numbers. What would, if we made sine of x equivalent to 3, what's 3 times a negative 1/3? Because that's really what we have here. And so the sine of x's would technically cancel off. So let me get a different color here. So this would kind of cancel off. As I do that, it's not like they just go away. It's kind of like we're left with a 1 there. Hopefully you're okay with that sort of idea. And 1 times a negative 1 just equals negative 1. So that's my final answer there. The first example is just equivalent to negative 1. It will not always be that. Sometimes it will be equivalent to a simpler trig idea. But that's kind of what we're trying to do in these basic simplifying sort of questions. Again, not necessarily one right answer, but most of the time we're going to get to that same answer. Okay, let's look at example 2 a second. I'm going to erase what I have there. And if we look at our next example, cosecant of x, it's fairly simple, but we could probably make it a little bit easier if I look at my reciprocal identities. Again, cosecant of x is the same thing as 1 over sine. So I'm going to write that as 1 over sine of x. That's a multiplication symbol there. If I look at the cosine of pi over 2 minus x, if I look at my cofunction identities, that's the same thing as sine of x. So I know it looks a little confusing right away, but if you just do the basic substitutions that you see from your list, now it's just a basic algebra problem. If we think of sine of x as, let's say, 7, we have 1/7 times 7, and that just equals the number 1. So that's my final answer for this one. Again, they won't always get us to that nice number answer, but that's kind of a nice one to look at right now. Okay, I'm going to erase that and look at my third example. So we have 1 plus tangent squared all divided by cosecant squared. This one will be potentially a little bit more difficult. For this one, if I start out, you'll get used to this as you do more of these questions, but I look at 1 plus tangent squared and I see on my Pythagorean identities in that chunk, I see that that is equivalent to secant squared. So I'm going to write that as secant squared of x still divided by that cosecant squared of x. And if it makes it easier for you, this could be rewritten. You don't have to do this, and I think eventually you'll get to a point where you don't have to write it this way. But this is really the same thing as secant squared of x. X is our angle times 1 over cosecant squared of x. And from there, if we just do our kind of our basic substitutions, secant is 1 over cosine. So that means secant squared is 1 over cosine squared. And 1 over cosecant is just sine, so 1 over cosecant squared is sine squared. And again, you'll get used to doing this a little bit faster down the road, but we know just through algebra that I can kind of combine these two things and make it sine squared over cosine squared, just kind of put the pieces back together. And then sine over cosine is tangent, so sine squared over cosine squared must be tangent squared, all of angle x. And that's going to be the simplest answer we can get for this one. So first two are a little bit easier to maybe come up with our answers, or at least the answers are a little bit nicer. The tangent squared is certainly not the most difficult thing ever, and a lot of times we will have a trig idea as our final answer. So this is the idea of just simplifying, where hopefully we all get to the same answer, but not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily have to be that answer to be counted as correct. Okay, jot down any questions, and we will see you in class.